Hi, Steve. Thank you
Hi.
for calling
Hi,
in.
Mukti. This is
Hi.
Steve.
Yeah.
We know each other. um,
Yes.
so, well, I want to. I'm actually with my dad, and he is passing in the next day or so. I'm at hospice right now,
Okay.
and I wanted to call and dialogue with you around that. And then, as I was listening to your last little bit here about devotion, it wasn't my original where I was going with it, but I think I can tie it into that.
Okay.
It's my dad has Alzheimer's, and so it's been a journey that we've kind of walked together for the last bunch of years here, and where I visit with him every day, with whether if I'm in person with him, then in person, otherwise on FaceTime. And yeah, I just, as I was listening to you actually there, I never really put that word on it, but it is a form of devotion. It has felt that way. And like a really kind of a very sacred relationship it's become. And so, right, because actually I kind of came to see that Alzheimer's is has certain similarities, actually, it can, with a very awake place, because there's no past at all.
Oh, right.
Life is being recreated constantly, and having watched him walk this path, I mean, he's very, very blessed, because what has happened for him is it just moved him into his heart, and he would speak as if he was kind of between two worlds. The last couple of years, it's been like he would go somewhere and then come back, and I would kind of have to sort of help him to bring those two worlds together. But anyway, he's crossing, and there's a lot of difficulty and pain and suffering that goes with that. And the original thing when I called in and spoke with the screener or whatever they're called, that I was bringing up was just reconciling that's to watch the suffering that people go through or can go through when they leave the world. And I was saying to his caregiver today, it's very very challenging to reconcile that with a kind universe and with the kind of beauty that you can experience in very wonderful perspectives and states of consciousness and realizations with that kind of suffering and it has put a real focus on the transition and on death for me the last bit here as it's been coming towards that. And I realize for me, there's an aspect of death that I just have not come to terms with. So I guess it's more just about me. I'm trying to serve him. I'm trying to, when I talk to him always, it's that the devotion aspect of it is that I just go into service and not in some kind of mechanistic way or, because I think it should. It just kind of, that gets activated. And I just give him my best. Always, it just kind of happens. And, but this is challenging because it's hitting into something I realize that I'm not totally comfortable with.
Would you want to describe that?
Describe that?
Yeah, what it's hitting. If you're able.
I'm not clear about death myself. I'm not clear that it's okay. It can seem a little scary actually watching somebody move in and out of it like he is right now, and in thriving, in agitation and things like that, and
Yeah. Now, sometimes when I'm in certain situations where I really feel like I'm in the unknown, I really like to ask myself, it's like I'll get quiet and I'll listen for like a deeper level of knowing. So on the surface, there's probably the sense like, wow, he's really not okay. He's really suffering. And then there may be, like when you get quiet, just like your sense underlying it, there might be like a different quality. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. Like if I were to just ask you, Steve, I know there's a part of you that is interpreting what's happening and, accurately so. Like you're hearing the pain and the body's responding in different ways. But when you ask yourself, like, how is he essentially, like kind of bottom line? Like, how's he doing? Do you have the same read, or is it different? Or
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit. Were you just asking me something?
Yeah. Yeah. This is the way I was engaging the conversation, and you can let me know if this works for you.
Okay.
But I think that often when we're in new territory, there's a part of us that's just really trying to get our bearings and is assessing the situation. And you've made your assessment that, wow, this is really tough for him, physically, just all the things that he's expressing and going through, and his body's going through these changes. And so that's one level of assessment. But what I was asking is, what do you think when you ask yourself, like, in essentially, how is your dad? Like kind of diving under the physical phenomena. Like, what's your sense? Like, how is he underneath
is there a part
all
of him
that?
where all is well, even though he's choking and he's gasping for breath, kind of a thing at the same time?
Yeah. Do you feel that at all? I mean, maybe not. I'm just asking, in this unknown and this new territory. It's all fresh, right?
I mean,
so I was just encouraging
to
check
radiate
that out.
for him, right? So I can hold that because I'm uncomfortable right now. I'm not in his situation. So when I'm there with him, I'm trying to be that for him.
Yes.
And
Great. So that's fantastic. Now I'm just giving like a little bit different entry point to it. Like, is there an attunement to the okayness in him, where that attunement is a kind of acknowledgement that brightens the okayness as it expresses through his presence?
I guess I can start to look for that, certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, I see him that way. Like I try to see him that way. Like it's all okay. I guess what it is I just sort of project myself into that, and that would be very frightening for me, I think. Being completely out of control, like just not able to even maybe gasp for a breath at some point, and that's what that's what it looks like happening for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as his body is starting to shut down.
Is it possible? This is what my encouragement would be to kind of almost like rewind the part of you that would project itself into his experience, and like kind of rest back into yourself in the quiet, and see if you can connect to his okayness, and like feel that and heighten that, like so that it brightens more in your sense of him and his sense of his own okayness. You know, it kind of shifts the identity. It kind of shifts the energetics out of the layer of experience,
Right.
and into what's prior to experience. Yeah.
I see. Is that a strategy one would use for the? I don't know if you'd even be of the mindset to be able to even shift into that for oneself. But I guess it brings up for me, just seeing myself in a situation like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
How do okay, we've had great awakenings or things in this, and then when you get to that kind of a situation, though, how do you let's say you're in a very weak state and forth.
Mm-hmm.
What would one do, or you do, or me do, in that situation? I guess, and I think that's what you're saying, is that you would try to find, you try to look for the place that's behind it, that's okay.
I think it's different.
Even as you're gasping for breath and very, very scary kind of, that one could, say would be very scary things, very.
I think it's a little bit different when you're the person going through it. It's not entirely different, but I was more suggesting where you could be at present, and that will actually have a direct effect on his sense of being. Not that what you're doing isn't having a tremendous effect on his sense of being. It's just I'm suggesting a different approach.
That's great. That's great.
For you. For him, you can't really know. I mean, but if you go to your own direct experience and rewind into the past and kind of sense, what do you do when, you're pushed to the limits, and it kind of almost gets decided for you to some extent at that point. He's just in it. He's in the process. But given all of your years of practice, it's there to, create the internal conditions where you might be able to experience that sense of your essential being that's always and ever okay in a more heightened way, even in the midst of great suffering. And sometimes, when I was talking about the simultaneity earlier, sometimes the greater suffering, actually highlights the okayness and brightens it even more, and they kind of co-arise. And when people have the attunement to that simultaneity, sometimes they'll even report that, in some of the deepest of pain, there's this sort of sublime, well, if we go as far as saying ecstasy, I mean, that's more rare, but, there can be this simultaneity of opposites becoming really heightened. There's often a lot of just regular old pain as well, but there can be this simultaneity, and part of it is that spirit of offering. There's a way of like offering one's pain into that. I mean, we could say offering it to God, but it's more offering the pain into that consciousness that's just right with it, into that intimacy, into that, Tiger 100% mode that can reveal new faces to the pain. That it's not just what's playing out physically. It's not just what we might see on the surface. It's a whole alchemy that's at work that contains its opposites. You might feel a greater sense of that redemptive quality. You could call it redemptive love, or
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think the thing that I'm realizing that's the issue here, and
good.
I think it's both for me and for me to be really serving him in the best way, is I can see that, like, for me, if I could go through that, if I was going through that, what he's going through, if there wasn't fear, I think it might be very incredibly uncomfortable and not something that I would be enjoying at all. But I think it's the fear part of it that makes it so,
Yeah.
right? And so it's hard for me to look at that and not project fear onto it, because that's how it would be for me if I'm seeing what he's done. And I mean, is that just, a matter of, just on a personal level, is that just a matter of you? Because you always hear about, well, you can get to a place, you have a certain realization, and then you have no more fear anymore. And I've heard Ajay say things like that. And I'm not, that's not.
I think that's like existential fear. There's existential fear, like the fear of non-existence. But there's also a fear of just, wow, that's painful. And, we're in these instruments that have this whole history of what pain feels like. And especially if that's, on a hair trigger, or it's been, activated a lot, it does create just this like fear of that suffering.
Yeah.
So it's maybe a longer conversation that we could have, because I know there's a few other callers, but part of the conversation is the relationship to suffering, and just how you feel about suffering. And there's often some people, I can't speak for you, but they'll feel like suffering is to be avoided at all costs, or suffering is bad. But there's also a way of engaging and being present with suffering where there's no airtime for any of that. It's just, you're just right with whatever's happening moment to moment, and there's no commentary, there's no assessment.
And I actually think that's how he is. That really is helpful, because part of his condition, he's so present with everything.
Yes.
So he has no reference for anything ever happening anywhere.
Right. That's a great advantage.
Part of it is that it keeps him absolutely centered in the moment always.
Yeah. So I think that's a great thing to attune to. That like going back to the earlier part of our conversation, I know you're just out of your goodness of your heart and your sincerity, you're wanting to kind of project yourself into his experiences of pain. But I was encouraging, feel below that to attune to his okayness. Is just completely in the now.
Yeah.
And I think when you kind of lock onto that energetically, that, even as we're talking about it, that brightens, and it brightens in all present,
I see that now. Yeah. Even though, like, you can see I don't know, it's a good analogy or not, but you can see an animal suffering, but they're probably suffering less than we imagine, in a way. Mm-hmm. Or they can be, they can be suffering less than we would have down to it, because they're just so immediately in it.
Yeah, I know the point you're making.
It's the whole world, and they're not thinking, and referencing a past or a future with it. They're just with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really helpful. I think
great.
that's it.
Yeah.
That's
Perfect.
It.
Yeah, you got it. I can feel it.
Oh,
Good.
thank you so much.
Yeah. And then, when that part of your mind kicks in about the future, because the fear is always based usually in the past or the future, then you can come back to this. Yeah. So it's really also just check out that part that's conscious of that. Like, oh, that knowing. Oh, I know this. Like, you know this, right?
Right.
So that just acknowledging that knowingness that knows what is always and ever well. And I know it's a lot less than this, but it's a kind of acknowledging living that. Like it's like a living acknowledging. It's like one word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the projection of suffering is always is worse than the actual. And if you're projecting it, if I'm projecting it on somebody else, or if I'm in the suffering and I'm projecting their past and the future to it,
Yeah.
that's what makes it overwhelming. And,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't have any indication that that's what he's doing. So now that I see that,
Oh, good.
I'm okay with it.
Perfect.
This is his journeying through to the next level, and it's only overwhelming if I project it out.
Yeah. What a great teaching.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. This is
Yeah.
really, valuable stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Good to hear you.
Really, really appreciate you. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I appreciate you too, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah. All the best to you both. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.